So hello and welcome back to Climbing on Mount Sophia. I'm excited to be joined today by Gage Murphy. Is that the correct way to pronounce your name? Okay,
Yep.
perfect.
Yeah.
So Gage reached out to me after watching some of my videos, and I think particularly the video that I made had the privilege to do with John Vervaeke. And yeah, just wanted to chat. So welcome, and kind of as always, in order to orient before we set out, just if you can share a little bit about yourself and maybe what kind of landscapes are important to you and maybe tools for climbing.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Ken. And I'm looking forward to having a conversation. So I think one of the ways in which I kind of first started connecting with you was conversations you've been having with John Vervaeke. Um, and I've been following John for quite a bit. I know you've mentioned before, the whole like Jonathan kind of trail and stuff. So
Yeah,
um,
the
it's
pipeline.
definitely, yes, it's a pipeline that I've seen continually gaining momentum. Um, and I've heard even recently, it's like everybody in the pipeline has been starting to realize the momentum behind the pipeline. And we're starting to do some like reflection on it and saying like, okay, there's a lot of momentum here. Where does it go? There's like a huge opening up. And so one of the things I want to talk to you about is how does that affect people who are in specifically the Christian tradition? And how do we, I don't know, descend back down into the cave, so to speak?
Sure.
Um, because I think to kind of go into a little background about me, I'm I also really don't attend church right now, though I consider myself a Christian. Um, and a lot of it is like I have a lot of trouble participating when I feel like a lot of to kind of use the Plato's cave analogy, extend it, feel a lot of the people are just looking at the images on the walls of the cave when I'm in church. And there's a loneliness in that when I feel like I've started to see through them or beyond them.
Sure.
Um, does that resonate with you in terms of similar experiences you've had?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a strange and kind of prescient issue I find myself in. I often I don't attend church very often, but when I do, like we went on Christmas Eve,
Hmm.
and it's this bizarre kind of experience of at one time being overwhelmed by the beauty and engagement with a community of people in in
Hmm.
in an attempt to participate in worship, a thing that means so much to me.
Hmm.
But then flipping it around and recognizing the the kind of shallow veneer of appearance that is, the words with which that is done, the postures with which that is held. And I mean, this is particularly in an evangelical context, so that's say different than maybe different traditions and that kind of thing. But for me, that I definitely feel that. What kind of flavor of Christianity is your background?
Yeah, mine would be evangelical as well. I didn't, I mean, I like kind of grew up in a Christian family, so to speak, but like I didn't really kind of take it seriously myself until I was probably in high school. Um, and I even felt then, like when I was like a new Christian, so to speak, um, that I was kind of viewing it differently than a lot of the
Okay.
people that I was starting engaging in the faith communities with. Like for me, it was very existential in the sense in which, like, coming of age, the map I had of the world was not working for me.
Mm.
It was, I honestly, I struggled with kind of suicidal thoughts and stuff related to this because, like, if whatever frame I'd been given kind of from our modern Western society was it. I felt there was an emptiness in that. And so when I found Christianity, it was very much like, whoa, it's just like an explosion of these new possibilities.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
and I never felt like it was like I never like came like I didn't like swing the pendulum and start grabbing these images and these frames. It was more like Christianity was this like possibility, so to
Interesting.
speak. I know I'm using very difficult language to try and describe it, but it's like
No,
it was like
no,
an
I hear you.
opening up.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay. So, I mean, that's very interesting because I can you say more, or can you talk about why that was? Like, what was it? Like, can you point towards maybe the distinction that it seemed for you made it an opening of possibility as compared to a lot of the people that for my experience is usually that that's not what it is,
Hmm.
especially in evangelical circles. And you even said, it didn't seem like that was what it was for people around you. So can you elicit like what where that difference lies?
I think a huge part of it had to do with it being so existential. Like I wasn't looking necessarily for another frame when I was kind of hitting that rock bottom. It was like
Also, you'd
I
hit
was
rock
letting
bottom first.
go. Yes,
Ah,
yes. And it was like it's like I mean, and this is kind of one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is like what what starts to happen when you just let that raw relevance realization work,
oh yeah,
for
yeah, yeah.
lack of a better word. Like, and that's hard because I think there are so many constraints on our relevance realization from so many different directions and everything, often self-produced. And but when you hit that existential bottom or you're in this existential space, it's like you like I don't know. I don't know how it happens, but like you step out of the frame for a second, and then all of a sudden things seem relevant quite naturally. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and
It's almost like the suffering and pain kind of stripped it away for you, kind of stripped away the. And I guess maybe in some ways that's a little bit what rock bottom is like
mm,
the the finding out that there's no frame left. How does that sound to your
no,
experience?
no, 100%. And like I think, I mean, this I'm 25 now. This has been like so kind of like a 10-year journey for me, and I feel like the whole entire journey has actually been about this like optimal grip
Uh,
on the Christian frame
uh,
versus what? I don't know, the raw relevance realization. And I don't
okay.
I'm saying them like verses, but I actually don't think they're in contention. It's more it's more like if I just let go, I haven't found that affords me more reality. Like I need something. I need some directive piece. Um, and like for me, Christianity has just been limitless for that. As deep as I go, it always matches me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
which
It's
is
always
why I'm
behind you.
like I'm in love with it in that sense.
Oh, sure, sure.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I like that resonates very, very strongly for me. I and I think that actually is very similar kind of language to some of the things that I've used in the past, where it's like it's almost like how does this land for you? Because for me, there's this way in which you when you turn it around and it becomes no longer a thing that's above you to kind of come underneath, but it becomes like the tradition and the religion and all the aspects of it, and even say the
Mm,
person of Christ himself and the all those notions become an exploratory space,
mm.
right? It becomes a um yeah, yeah, there's no like there's nothing that you can't look at from any angle you want to, you might
Mm.
say.
Yes. No, I agree with that. I think I know you said something quite recently that I thought was interesting about like the classic cliche phrase of like don't stand for something or you'll fall for anything.
Yeah, yeah.
And that you were kind of playing with the idea of inverting that. Um, and I thought that was quite interesting, in the sense in which I think I've experienced that in my own life,
Mm,
um, where the proclivity of myself is to fall for something, right? Like in the comfort of the images,
mm,
right? And like I almost feel like that's where my faith is not operating, right? Is
mm,
like, and that image can be Christianity, like in this evangelical church kind of sense, right? Where it's like, I don't, like, that's not faith to me. Faith
mm,
is like when I don't have any of those imagistic anchors and I'm looking to like move through into the next frame, which I keep finding Christ there. So it's not
mm,
like something antagonistic.
mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's
I
almost
don't know
like
what that
you're,
does for you.
yeah, yeah. No, I'm. Let me see if I'm getting you right. If I'm hearing you correctly, it's like there's the falling for something is always a falling for maybe an ideology or a prepackaged um, way of being that requires you to assent, and
Mm,
that is the thing that catches you.
mm,
Whereas the the place in which you come to encounter the idea and maybe even the person of Christ is the the movement beyond any any image that you're able to comprehend. Is
yes.
that kind of what you're saying?
No, absolutely. That was a really good
Yeah.
way of putting it. I think, and that's kind of what I meant by having like that optimal grip on the and I think like you and like many others, just like so much of Vervaeke's non-religious language is so helpful
Yeah.
to map onto this. Because it's like the the Bible is so like imagistic in all of it, right? And it's
Mhm.
like it's so difficult to bridge our technical way of understanding the world in our in our current Western frame. It's like we need those bridges.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's what so much of kind of this little corner is about,
Yeah.
is creating those bridges because there's some sense in which it's like I'm using them to further understand what I like intuited when I first encountered Christianity when I was like 15.
Yeah.
But like didn't have it, like it was like, okay, this is going to be something. It's like how like Kierkegaard says, like, I follow Jesus, but Socrates is my teacher.
Yeah.
Like, I, like Jesus is like has the mystery, right?
Mhm.
But like, I don't know what I'm doing there.
Yeah,
Like,
but well,
right? Like, yeah,
you need
yeah, go
tools to
ahead.
explore it.
Yes, yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think your conversation recently with Jordan Wood, was really reflective of what I'm saying. Is like there's this deep mystery there, and like I need teachers to kind of move in this direction and stuff like that. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, Vervaeke and others have been instrumental to that for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And then and the one of the ways that I see that it's been difficult is that there's this this aspect of the mystery is something that's been held up as it's become something that almost is forbidding of exploration, right?
Mm,
I think there was this thing that happened when with the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution, where because we started shifting our approach and posture to reality to this, we can know, we can understand things, we can pull things apart and get more of a grasp of what they are, that there was almost this pulling away of the Christianity to say no, 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 but not this, not this, like don't look too close at this, right? And that's certainly not true of all Christians, but I think it was a movement that happened. And a good example of that, I would say, is like say the rejection of evolutionary theory by especially a lot of parts of the Protestant church, which
100%.
I grew up steeped in that. Ken Ham and Answers in Genesis was like, I've been to that museum and I listened to all those tapes and I knew that.
Yeah.
And it was like, and now looking at it, I'm like, man, I don't know how you can be a Christian and not believe evolution. Like it just like once God is no longer over there and you understand God as say this the central line from St. Maximus that Jordan Wood wrote his book on, that Christ strives in and through all things to incarnate himself, something like that. I'm getting it slightly wrong.
Through all things. Yeah.
And it's like, like that's evolution, right? But there was this move of like, no, don't look at this, right? And now it's like, well, now it's become so deified that then it's like, well, now I can't connect it to my real life. And so so in some sense I would say, like, much like you, I think my my passion and part of why I've been so taken with John is that John has afforded me tools to start to connect that mystery to my real life. And as you said, I've found that every time I open another door of the mystery, it's like far from enhancing the hermeneutic of suspicion and being like, aha, it's like, oh wait, like not only is it more beautiful here, but there's something beyond. Like it continues to call me further and further into the mystery, no matter how far I go to understand it.
Yeah, no, I think like kind of even using that example you used like about evolution, I think like the ancients, like it was so embodied, right? Like this intuition of the way the world worked and their relationship to God and everything like that. So that when the paradigm and the frame started to shift, right, in the late Middle Ages, they didn't have a propositional answer to the issues that were starting to arise. So the only response they knew how to do was to withdraw, right? And you see this like slowly, that's like the history of the Western civilization, is just Christianity withdrawing from everything. Because it doesn't know how to answer the questions at the level that everyone's talking now. And fair enough, because there's a sense in which they're not meant to be answered at that level if we're going to be really talking about them in their true essence. And like I'm reading DC Schindler's book right now.
Which one?
Plato's Critique of Impure Reason.
Yeah.
And
it's like one of my all-time favorite books.
Oh, it's phenomenal. I'm not even halfway through, but
nice.
It
gets better, and that's hard to imagine, I know, but it gets
better. No, really. It's fascinating me how like Socrates is like, he's correct not in his propositions, but he's correct in everything else. Like it reminds me of the way in which it's like Christianity, like it's not going to argue at the level of these, these other players in the drama. It like he concedes that he doesn't know, right? Like it reminds me so much of like Alyosha and Brothers Karamazov, how he doesn't have the answers to his brother's qualms against theism. Like he doesn't have them, but like the answer is the way he lives the rest of the book. Like that's the answer. Like there's no proposition that's the answer to Ivan's, like, okay, Ivan's right at that level.
Yep.
And so I think that for me is something that I feel so passionate about, trying to help get people out of that and recognize that the answer lies in something more embodied. And I want to get Christians that are stuck in this tension where they can't feel like they can't move forward with their faith. They can't feel like they move forward with the world. It's an awful place to be in. I've been in it, and I know so many people in my life that are in it because I have a lot of Christian friends and family. And I don't know, like and it sounds like, and the reason I wanted to talk with you is like we're in similar spots in that regard, and I want to talk to you about like what do you think some solutions are to that? I know that's a crazy question, but
yeah, no, yeah, I like. So there's some of the things that come to mind are like some of the approaches that are being taken. You know, you have, say, the pajo approach, which is, you know, both of us in some sense are here due to pajo to some degree, I think. I mean, my thinking has been tremendously afforded by his approach, but I and you know, I don't know, like I had a conversation with him, you know, recently, and
yeah,
it was hard for me because I was in my own way. But what I really was trying to get at was this, you know, how John always says neither nostalgia nor utopia. And the feeling I often get from Jonathan is a bit of a nostalgia for a Christendom of say the High Middle Ages. And that bothers me as the answer.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that Jonathan necessarily espouses that, but that's the feeling that I get. And so that's, you know, and that's one approach, right? Like one of my very best friends and deepest influences on me, my brother-in-law, is he attends an Eastern Rite Catholic church now, and is very like it's amazing. And
yeah,
I, you know, there's a part of me that maybe if there was one of those actually closer to me, I would participate there, because I think there's a lot more going on there. But at the same time, there's the movement of openness towards an integration of the things that are new and outside that I struggle with in relation to kind of a return to the traditional. Now, there's, you know, I didn't know this, but I recently spent time with my brother-in-law, and he was talking about how in one of the foundational documents of Vatican II talks about how there's some sort of recognition that there are multiple ways up the mountain, that to say access the transcendent is not necessarily only exclusive to the church. Now I'm not sure how far that goes, but you know, having that actually be a foundational piece would make me much more comfortable in engaging with traditional Christianity. So, you know, there's the whole, so that's the whole like traditional approach, right?
Yep.
Let's go back to tradition, and there's wonderful things about traditional Orthodox or Catholicism. You know, there's so much more participatory rituals and all these, and like, I mean, I have icons in my house. I say many of those prayers, and they're deeply helpful for me. I wear a rosary. Like, but you know, there's also a reason I don't go there as well. Or attend one of those churches. Then there's, you know, kind of, you could take the other approaches, you know, like John's religion that's not a religion, which I'm very open to be a part of at some level, but at the same time, I don't, you know enough about how it's going to materialize and what that all looks like, you know. Like, yeah, so there's that. There's also, you know, things like what Paul van der Klee is doing with his estuaries and things like that, which I think is awesome. So I guess, I don't know. Those are the things that come to mind when you bring it up.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think like it's like that tension between the traditionalism or the fundamentalism and like the perennialism. And I think like I've wrestled with that quite a bit, because like I've always like in this kind of this trying to not hold the propositions too tightly, right? Like this practice that I've been trying to have about seeing what reality affords me, and how it relates to Christianity. I've like I've noticed that like there's a perennialism type of thinking that seems like there's a dark side to it.
Mm.
In the sense in which it's like, I don't know. I don't know how you can bring things from these different directions, right? From all around the mountain and kind of come up and realize that there's something there. But also remember, like, I think it makes more sense on the ascent, but I don't understand it on the descent. Does that make sense to you?
Mm.
Like, it's like, where are you descending to?
Oh, I
And
see.
and I think, so, like, I think you have to descend like somewhere specifically. Maybe I'm wrong about that, and I'm interested to
Mm.
see what you think. But it's like, I don't know it, because like I've been interested in things like Hermeticism and stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
these kind of thinkings that like are all about here. And I take everything the Bible says very seriously. It's like, what is this like fear of like divination and things like that, right? Like, what is this fear of like the perennial or esoteric spirit in
Yeah. Yeah.
Christianity? Like,
Yeah.
there's something there. Like, so like I'm with you with everything you're saying, and that like there and that. But when I'm also like, okay, my answer to that isn't to say, okay, fundamentalism, right?
Right.
So like,
Right.
there's this tension, and I'm trying to be comfortable in the tension until the tension is resolved. I don't know. Just
No, I hear you. I hear. I mean, that's where I find myself most of the time as well. So if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like one of the things you're saying is like, okay, maybe there's multiple ways to get to the point where I begin to experience self-transcendence. I begin
yes.
to find the modes of being that allow me to connect to the really real in such a way
Mm.
that the sacred becomes obvious to me, and it
Mm.
becomes obvious not as a thing over there, but as a thing that is actually constitutive of my experience of reality.
Yeah.
And then and I take that as what you mean in terms of like the way up to here.
Yes. Yes. Totally.
um and then but then in terms of the way back down, um are you saying something like, well, we don't necessarily want to just try to pick and choose things from all kinds of any of them and just use them? Are you saying more like, well, maybe you should pick one that works for you and use that as your say practice to um work with affording more of that in your life, or in yeah, yeah, yeah.
No, no, no. I know. I get you. I don't know if I'm there yet. Like in the sense in
Okay,
which I think I'm still thinking about it abstract.
okay, okay,
Like
okay.
in the sense of which like I guess I'm thinking about it more in the sense of the 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 absolute, right? Like has to manifest itself in the relative,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that
yeah,
it's bound by that, and
yeah,
it like so that's all I'm at. I'm like that's all I haven't been able to take that into like something like okay now find one that works for you like in terms of a tradition because I
yeah,
feel like there's still something missing and I don't know how I know that's not helpful but like there's a sense in which I get how that works that as
yeah,
just a
yeah,
basic pattern that the
yeah, yeah,
absolute manifests itself into a relative and
yeah,
to pretend that it doesn't seems like a seems like it will cause problems.
yeah.
That the absolute doesn't manifest itself absolutely.
I
It
see, I see.
manifests itself relatively.
Yeah, yeah,
So to ever talk about the absolute and keep talking about the absolute in absolute terms is not the way in which the absolute functions with the relative. Right. So like this natural tendency of like perennialism and the hermeticism to talk about it, the thing in itself, I think is dangerous. It
mm.
withdraws you from
Yeah,
the
yeah. It's Gnostic.
real in a sense.
It's like a Gnostic kind of move.
Yes, yes.
Um,
And obviously there's different versions of that all across the space right now. And so I'm not necessarily, I haven't figured out necessarily like a direction to go with it, but I'm trying to keep that in mind for
Yeah,
myself and kind of
yeah,
see what happens with that.
yeah,
That's just kind of where I'm at the moment.
yeah, yeah. No, and I think I'm in a very similar place. Like one of the things that
Mm,
my I take very, very seriously, and I've seen very much in my own life the way in which being faithful in the little things leads to greater things.
mm,
And that the care and attention and consistency with which I maintain um, my character in relation to small things opens doors to more significant things
mm,
that are then obvious. And so I say that because I think that's actually my approach. I don't know what it means for Christianity to resurrect, but I think that that is a good way of saying what is necessary to happen.
mm,
Um, because I think I haven't made this argument publicly yet, but I think that Christianity is the place, and the person of Christ specifically is the place where the narrative reaches its completion and transcends into non-narrative.
mm.
And you know, this comes out of working with John's idea that narrative can't be ontologically primary, and
Mm,
that caused me all kinds of problems, and I just worked with it for a while. But what I seem to be feeling out of that is that it's like, okay, I need the narrative to get from the particular of myself as in this body, in this place and time, in this container as an aspect of reality. I need a narrative to back out of all of that to
mm,
get to the place where I can let go of my ego and see see and be in with the absolute as the particular, and allow the
mm.
absolute to become the particular, right? For to become symbolic, right? Because I'd say I think that's what the notion of theosis really is to become a living symbol, right? To become a a a living individual who is a part presencing the whole. And
Mm.
in order to do that, I think you have you it's the narrative that you need narrative to pull you up to that kind of place.
Yeah.
But in order to actually flip over to truly symbolic, the narrative has to drop off, because narrative is non-eternal. Narrative is bound to temporality
Mm.
just by its very structure.
And you're saying so like there's something about the Christ narrative that is in itself that pattern.
Yeah, yeah,
Very interesting. I think I like I've seen this, I've heard this like kind of more on a like a smaller microcosm level in terms of like John talking about how the parables like destroy the narrative within itself.
yeah,
And like I haven't thought about how like that's actually happening at a greater level throughout the ministry of Christ. And
yeah,
that's
yeah,
wow, I'm really gonna have to think about that. That's very interesting.
yeah. And the Bible as a whole does this.
Yeah,
I think,
yeah.
right? Like it tells a narrative and finishes with the Christ narrative, the person of Christ and the life of Jesus, which is the ultimate story. I mean, we've heard that argument plenty of times. I don't want to remake it, but
Yeah.
like that, but it's the ultimate story which actually claims to touch the non-narrative space, and not only touch it,
Yes.
but actually presence it.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then it's not as if, you know, if Christianity is true, there have to be however many paths up the mountain. because if Jesus if the sacrifice of Jesus and the redemption is actually really real, then all of us have been made really real. And therefore, it's not like you can escape it. You're just here.
Mm.
And it's like here's one way of talking about it is like if you imagine a choose your own adventure like book, right, or story.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what's the beginning and the end? Most of us tend to think of our lives as a choose your own adventure story, that the beginning is my birth and the end is my death.
Yeah.
And that's true from the standpoint of the particular. But from the standpoint of the absolute, the beginning is creation and the end is just the being of all things. Right? And however the being of all things finally comes together, I don't really know how to talk about that, but and maybe that isn't temporal, but it's just simply the eternal existence outside time, beyond time, right? And there's a way in which the choose your own adventure in between is all of us intermingling and interplaying all of that. But because sin creates non-reality, right? Sin is something like the misapplication of attention, such that something that should become real is not realized. And because there's that, in order for what has been made non-real to actually be realized, I think that's why Jesus had to die and rise again. And that's what it means for Jesus to redeem the world and take on the sins of the world. It's like he was making real all the aspects of reality that were made unreal by the sins of the individuals. And as such, it's all actually real, finally. So you can't escape God's love. Is the point I'm making. Which means that, in our attempts to move up the mountain, what we're really trying to do is participate in our own small way in order to just play the highest role we can. But ultimately, like, the story's already finished. Like, the narrative's done. It's just, how in my particular way am I going to actually participate that? It seems to me that in order to participate that well, the way that I've found to do that is to participate in the Christian narrative and the Christ narrative to the point that the narrative itself drops off.
That's almost like what it's like to be called, is to participate in the way you're talking about it. Like, that's what it's like to be called by God, right? Like, there's this sense in which, like, the calling is in the participation that's happening regardless, and already has happened. And in all those ways you can describe the non-temporal temporal. But I think even, like, I've thought a lot about, like, how the revelation of Jesus Christ, that idea of revealing, right? And like like it's like growing up, you just think it's like, oh, it's when he comes, like it's the second coming. It's like he's revealed. But it's like it's more like things are all revealing themselves. Like the discrepancies between the things and the appearances are like resolved. Like there's everything is being resolved and revealed for what it is. And I think when you were talking about like sin as non-being, and like I was just immediately thinking of how, like, in some sense, like like all of sin is about like idolatry. And it's like an idol is like non-being, like it's something that's lost that relationship between the appearance and the being itself.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It's taking the part for the whole.
Yes.
Yeah. And fundamentally, like, and this is part of why I think, in the biblical narrative, you see in the beginning, in the Old Testament, the sins are the actions. But sin as such begins far upstream of action. I think this is that idea of all of my good works are as filthy rags. It's like it's not the actions that are the problem, because Alan Watts has that great notion of beware of virtue, and which I think connects with the third temptation of Christ, which is essentially a temptation of virtue. Look at all the good things you could do if you ran the world.
Yeah.
Right. But that's already predicated on idolatry, because I'm running the world. Right. And thus I've idolized myself. Right. The idolatry that happens at original sin with Adam and Eve is to use myself as the reference point of the real. And so it's in the idolatry of the the self that all other idolatry is downstream of.
I think that I'm thinking about, even as you're talking about that, and like I'm thinking about the notion of the good in Plato's Critique of Impure Reason, and how like that's the thing being juxtaposed to what you're saying with sin.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow. Okay.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yes, and this is why I don't know if you got to this point in the book, so I apologize if it's spoilers, but there's a point at which he says, the good becomes realized not in any propositional sense, but it is available to be seen through Socrates.
Yes.
Right.
He's alluded to, I don't know if he said that specifically, but I can tell that's like a central idea of the whole text.
Yeah, exactly. And so the good is something that I can be related to in such a way that those who, well, just all of reality is able to access by means of my being in the world. But it's not something I can have. It's not predicated on me in any way. It's in the removal of any idolatry of myself that the good is able to shine through. So yeah, absolutely. Yes.
It's like Socrates in the good is like a microcosm of the Son and the Father. That might be an extreme statement to make.
No, I mean,
like that. That's what I'm seeing as we're talking about this.
Yeah, like I see nothing. I think for me, it's a completely correct statement to say that like Socrates, Siddhartha Gautama, and Jesus are all kind of are all properly symbolic in this sense. I think the thing that's particular about Jesus is that he comes from the far side and thus creates the way. It creates the opening. It creates the availability for the individual particular to presence the whole. But because that's atemporal, right? It's because that's eternal. People before Christ in the temporal time frame can certainly become full symbols. Right. So you have, I mean, in the Bible, you have Melchizedek, you have and even things like Elijah going up in the chariots of fire.
Yeah.
And Methuselah, or no, who is it that didn't die?
Enoch.
No. Is it Enoch? Yeah, whoever.
There might be two Enochs back there.
Yeah.
One is the Book of Enoch. I don't know.
Yeah. But that, yes. So for me, it's not like, I don't think it's sacrilegious at all to say that any of those kind of individuals who seem to be, say, enlightened or whatever that designation you want to place, I don't think that's any problem at all. I think they're living from the same place that Jesus as a person is living from.
Yeah, this like exactly. I think people hear that and they think it's like, oh, Jesus is among others. Like it's just like they're like a list in a series of, and it's like that's not. It's more like they're participating in the pattern at different levels. And therefore, there's almost like that's a better confirmation of the pattern of Christ. The fact that there are other people like that. That's not in. Again, it's like one thing you used in your conversation with John that I really resonated with was like how like this defensive posturing toward the world when you're kind of like in the apologetic frame, right? And when you're concerned with the things that like I can just hear people saying as we're talking about this, and how like when you have that defensive posture, you're like missing the magic, and how and how all the pieces come together. You're missing like why Christ is the fullness of all things.
Yeah.
Like by obsessing over like possible sacrilegious things, you're actually missing why God is like why Christ is the ultimate of everything.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's what's been such a problem for me in anything from as simple as just attending church is everything's about reduction.
Mm.
Everything's about reduction. And I I can't like reduction isn't the same thing as the descent down into the cave. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like
Mm.
even though they kind of can look similar, I they're not the same because they're coming from different places.
Yeah. Yeah. They're held with different postures.
Yeah.
Might be another. Yeah. 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 So, so what do you think? Where in terms of, say, realizing this kind of vision into, like, especially Christianity, right? Because like Christianity, there's already so much there,
Hmm.
but it's a weird place because it's like a minefield that already has the machinery you want to give them. Like, it's strange.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just from kind of seeing just what's been happening over the last 5 years or so, um, I think like this type of thinking is only like gaining momentum and it's just going to continue to spread. Um, and I think that's a part of like a bigger pattern that this is like 400 years of history ready to turn itself over in the Pajoian pattern sense.
Yeah, yeah,
What's happening is inevitable.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um, and I went to the conference in Thunder Bay,
yeah. Okay.
and that was very much the sentiment there.
Yeah.
We felt like everybody that was there felt like okay, this is why do we feel like we're at the beginning of some new thing and like not in some sort of like conspiratorial sense like it just like
Totally.
there was this energy about like this is the way things are headed and we're
Yeah.
just like happy to be a part of it and
Yeah.
I think a lot of people were talking about like there's going to be a massive vying for attention
Mm.
in this space now in the way that there was vying for attention in other ways maybe before in the sense of all sorts of forms of spiritualism that aren't life-giving to people
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and like in the ways in which the negative sides of paganism was
Sure. Sure. Sure.
um,
Yeah.
I still there's still a real sense in which I feel that Christianity never really reconciled itself with paganism well enough in the early
Yeah. Yeah.
centuries of the church.
Certainly.
And that the church wrestled with kind of some of the problems we're wrestling with now, that perennialism, fundamentalism tension.
Yeah.
And I mean, like I think that's what's so um, I think that's what the Inklings were so concerned about, actually, is like they were concerned with like this moving out of modernity, but then they were also concerned with like, yeah, but like we're still working on the issue that wasn't resolved in the early centuries of the church.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a
And
reason we got here in the first place. This is the
exactly, and in the
manifestation of
early
a problem.
20th century, when the whole materialist frame was beginning its breaking down, that's where you have all the prophets of the meaning crisis kind of emerging in different places in Europe. It's like that, all of a sudden the conversations of paganism are coming back. Like because now paganism is something you can talk about. It's not just like, oh, the superstitious people of the past. It's like paganism is now actually a conversation and back in conversation with Christianity. And
Yeah.
so I'm quite certain the church, which has positioned itself as being largely the evangelical church, is like, I don't know, anti-atheist or something like that, is not
Yeah.
very well positioned for this
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
terms of, and I don't mean this in terms of like a preserving of the church. That's not what I'm saying, but like in terms of having conversations that are actually applicable and real to people.
Yeah. 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 Or allowing transcendence of the church is, it might be one way
Yeah.
to talk about. Do you think, like, because one of the things that I thought about and wanted to do, although it's not become available for me because of my own limitations, would be to say just go into an evangelical church and really, participate wholeheartedly and simply, open up space for the kinds of conversations to happen where the kinds of movements become available that we've gone through. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think you're right. I think I've been convicted about this for months, so it's like, oh, there's another one saying it. Like, I think that is what I need to do, and I understand why I've been resistant to it, but I think I'm trying to gain up the energy to go about and do that. I know,
Yeah.
like, I met people at the conference in September who are doing that in their communities, even though they're coming from a very different place. They're like participating in, and they're opening people up.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, just some of the books that I've read on this journey, even over the last few years, are a great, like, because I would feel like so overwhelmed with that task myself, are like centering it around like a book group.
Sure.
And like I've even thought about like how helpful it would be to just like read Mathieu Pageau's book on the language of creation as just an opening up point to a different way, because there's something that's like very safe about that, especially because it's very centered on literally the biblical narrative. Like we're not.
Like that's one of the things that I've found. So if I'll tell you quickly what I have been doing in this kind of space, because I as soon as I walk into a church, all kinds of things start happening for me, and I just like spin down. There's a local gym that I go to every morning, and I started having conversations with people there that were interesting, and so I just started what I call it a wisdom group, and it's been going for about a year now, and there's 12 to 16 guys that are routinely coming, and somebody brings a topic, literally whatever's bothering them is what I tell them to bring, and then we just talk about it. And it's been incredible to note the growth, mostly in myself, but in others as well, in terms of being open and allowing others to open up through questions, right? Because when I started the group, like I was trying to present things, it was a disaster. It was but now I just kind of sit back.
It's like Jesus asking questions. Sorry, I need to cut you off there.
No, exactly. I mean, like I just try to participate, Socrates, basically. And so like that's been the thing that I've has been available for me in that space. How does that?
That's really encouraging. Yeah, no, it is, and I think that's, and that's like why I want to center it around like some of the books that have been instrumental to me, because it's like the books are acting as the opening up. Like I'm not coming here, like I don't want to be a teacher in that sense. Like it's also really important to me. It's like I'm not trying to go into the church and wake people up, because that would be extremely pretentious on my part, because people are participating at this deep thing called Christianity at so many different levels. In the same way in which I believe that many of the ancients were participating in such an embodied, participatory, intuitive sense that wouldn't even be able to have the types of conversations we're having right now, does not mean it's not any more real to them. Even though I do believe that there are many scattered within that are just chained to the wall looking at the images. And so you have to be careful, because there's like, it's happening at such a non-abstract level for a lot of people. And so can I use something like that, or like questioning kind of how you asked, and kind of see what happens?
I
like that.
It's
I like
playful,
that.
and it has to be playful, right?
Yes.
Because like, there's a great security in not needing to hold anything, right? Because it's like, I mean, if somebody wants to be very serious about their Christianity, like I'll go wherever you want to go with you. But you believe in Jesus? Yeah, me too. What does that mean? Like I'll go as deep as you want to go with that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But also, is there a tension point for you? Or are you gonna, if you say something that brings up a tension point in me, if you can do well, it's like, okay, here's this tension point. What do you think about that? Right? That's my propensity is often to be like, yeah, but here's the problem with that. And it's like, no. It's like let me tell you what I heard, and then let me tell you where this doesn't seem to make sense. And what do you think?
Yeah.
And it seems like if you do that and you just continue to do that with people, it's like, man, they'll take themselves there, because that's really what
Yeah.
it's all about, right? Like that's
That's the dialogos. That's like, I mean, even in our conversation that we've been having here, it's like we're exploring, we're playing, we're talking about the tensions. Like, I'm sure there's stuff we could sit here and argue about, right? Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Sure.
I'm sure there's like, but like, I don't know that I'd learn as much by doing that.
Totally. Yeah.
I feel that I'm learning by participating in this playful act of like talking about the tensions, letting them sit there, paying attention to them, seeing where they go from here. And it's like this active, and I also feel like that gives me so much more ownership over my own like development. And like when you're just, I mean, it's kind of the way in which like, psychotherapy should operate. It's like you don't start teaching them as the therapist. It's like then they don't have any ownership over their own sense of self-discovery and self-renewal. And I feel like it's the same with this.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's that maybe we all become humble enough to ask good questions and listen well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna have to go here shortly, but this has been a pleasure. I've enjoyed talking to you. Any kind of final things you want to add on?
Yeah, no, I've really enjoyed it. I I I didn't necessarily have anything specific I wanted to talk to you about. It was more in the sense of things I've kind of watched you wrestling with
Yeah,
and resonated with those same wrestlings and
totally.
wanted, like, having seen now being in this kind of corner, seeing where like just a dialogos can kind of take you. I wanted to kind of see how it would go here, and it's been really good. So I really appreciate you taking your time.
Yeah, of course, and hopefully we'll get to talk again sometime before too long.
Yeah, absolutely. Great.
All right.
Thanks, Ken.